Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about The Story of an Hour, written by Kate Chopin. Now, before I go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, before I go into summary of The Story of an Hour, I'm going to give you guys some background information on when this work was being written and how significant it is, and also some history on Kate Chopin and the women that she was writing about, and how after her death, her writing and the writing of other women, significant women, kind of like sparked a revolution in America. So this is 19th century literature. Kate Chopin, her works were written within the 19th century and the earliest 20th century. And at that time in America, women did not have wonderful lives. Men drank a lot in that time. Their alcohol wasn't really being regulated at that time. So a lot of men would go for long days of work and then come home. Well, they wouldn't come home. They would go get a drink. They would go drink and drink a lot. And then after they're done drinking from a saloon or I guess the bar of that day, the bars of those days, they would go home, and if their wives would get on their nerves, they would beat their wives. And at that time, domestic violence wasn't recognized. Period. Unless the husband, I guess, killed his wife or really injured her, the authorities wouldn't really get involved. They would just call it marriage matters, right? So, life wasn't easy. Kids were drinking. There was no legal drinking age in the 19th century, and there wasn't even the water wasn't that clean. Drinking water wasn't that clean, so most people drank. Kids drank. Everybody was drinking. So it wasn't a fun time. People died very young. Kids died very young. A lot of kids died in infancy. It wasn't that rare to see people die in their 20s or young people die very early. That was something that happened. It was usual. So that's the world that Kate Chopin saw. Even in the middle class and even in the when you're thinking about the 1%, or you're thinking about rich people, men held all of the power. Men told women what to do, and pretty much women just had to follow social etiquette. First, their fathers would control their lives, and then when they got married, their husbands would be tagged in, and the husband would then control their lives. So women always existed underneath the umbrella of a man, and men always controlled the lives of women. I will even say this. I think for Kate Chopin, her doctor told her to write to help her deal with her problems. So as you can see, men told women what to do. That's just how it was. And you can imagine in a marriage, there would just be more control given on to the man, because then when you get married in a time like that, whatever the husband says goes. So basically, that's the world that Kate Chopin is coming from. And Louise Mallard, the character that we really focus on within The Story of an Hour, she is one of these women. She really fits the mold of the woman within the 19th century, the woman that stayed home, the woman that wasn't a breadwinner, and that was all women. I would imagine that in poorer communities, certain women had to work. Maybe work involving ironing, maybe ironing a lot of clothes for people in her neighborhood, a lot of cleaning jobs, something like that. Really kind of like jobs that revolve around the home. That's the job I would say women would have within the 19th century. But you would have to exist within the poorer communities. When we're talking about the middle class and the upper class, women in those communities, they would be taught how to keep social etiquette. They would be taught how to dress nice, how to look good, and how to, do the works that a woman needs to do at home. That was the position of the woman, of the wife within the 19th century and the early 20th century. So that's enough background. That's where Kate Chopin is coming from. Well, from reading a few of her works, and from reading this short story, that's kind of like where she's coming from. You can see from this work. So basically, within the short story, we get introduced to a woman by the name of Louise Mallard. Louise is, we're told from the get-go that she has a weak heart, and she's a fragile woman. And the way that they describe, or that the short story described Louise Mallard, is that, she's like glass. You don't want to touch her, and if you touch her, she might break. If you grab her too hard, she might break, and you don't want to stress her out or tell her too much bad news, because the idea of women within the 19th century was that, they're fragile. They can't take too much stress, too much pressure. They can't put anything on their shoulders. They're hysterical. They're just these little dainty things that we have to take care of. These things that we have to be careful with. And this short story really doesn't hide that from us, because from the get-go we're told that Louise Mallard is fragile. She has a faint heart. She has a heart condition. You got to be careful with her. And after we're told how dependent Louise Mallard is, and how she has a condition, how sick she is, how she's fragile. That's really, really well written out for us, right? And then right after that, we get introduced to a character by the name of Richards. Richards works at a newspaper office, and he gets news of a train crash, and apparently there's a list of people who died in the train crash, and the name of Brentley Mallard appears on that death list. And Richards is like, you know what? I know the Mallards. I should go tell Mrs. Mallard that her husband is dead. So Richards goes over to the Mallard's household, and pretty much he doesn't tell Louise head on. He goes to Josephine, who is Louise Mallard's sister, and tells Josephine that I got news. I work at the newspaper's office. I'm just saying that. He doesn't say that, but he has news. He works at the newspaper office, and pretty much a horrible crash happened, and Brentley Mallard is dead. Here's his name on the list, on the death list. And so he's like, Richards is like this death angel, this angel of death that comes in and says, "Oh, your husband's dead." And he tells Josephine, go tell your sister that her husband is dead. And so pretty much Josephine breaks the news to Louise Mallard gently. Louise Mallard, she has been taught in the rules of social etiquette. She does what she needs to do as a woman who is grieving, as a woman who's in shock. I mean, she does, things that are natural, things that, I mean, she puts on the show, the works, and then she kind of like goes up into her bedroom. She climbs the stairs and goes up into her bedroom, and Josephine is like closely watching Louise. And, Josephine wants to make sure that her sister is all right, and that, she's not going to do anything bad to herself, because she just received, Louise Mallard's received horrible news. She's received horrible news. So Louise goes into her bedroom, she locks the door, she sits in a comfortable chair, and she looks out the window, And out the window, she starts to see the world in a different lighting. It's like, she has these rose colored glasses on. Now, they're not put on um, right away. I mean, first she's in the room by herself. She's mourning her husband's death. She's received bad news. Her husband is dead. She's on her own. She's supposed to be crying. That's what you would expect from a woman who's just gotten this bad news. Um, but then, I mean, she's looking at the sky through the window and she sees blue sky. And then, she hears singing, she hears songs, she starts to see things differently. Like, things are opening up for her. Like, things are being different. And then something else starts to come into her life. It's this joy of freedom, this idea that now she's not tied to a man, because as you would imagine, she was first, her father had complete control over her, and now her husband, had complete control over her. Now her father's out of the picture, and the story doesn't mention her father. I'm just putting that in because that's how life was for women back then. So her father would be out of the picture. Her husband is dead, so he's out of the picture. Now she's her own person. She's her own woman. She has complete control of her life. And she's thinking about a better tomorrow, a tomorrow where she can make decisions for herself. She can go where she wants to. She can do what she wants to. She can stay laid out as long as she wants to because she doesn't have to ask permission from a man of any kind. And this joy, this excitement of being able to write your own identity, this joy and excitement to be able to be who you are and to not ask permission from anybody, it is something that's new and that's exciting for her. Now, she tries to fight against it, but it's what she wanted. It's what she really wanted deep down. She wanted to be free. She wanted to be independent. She wanted to have her own self-purpose, her own ambition and all that kind of stuff. Now, when we're talking about social etiquette, she tries to think about her husband, try to mourn her husband because that's what she's supposed to do. Now, you have to keep in mind here, don't just think that Louise Mallard was a horrible husband and that he came home and beat Mrs. Mallard and beat Louise. No, Louise Mallard tells us very clearly that he was a gentleman, that he was a gentleman, that he was loving, that he was amazing, that he was a nice husband, a wonderful husband, and that most of the time they got along, and sometimes they didn't get along, but it was a good marriage. She doesn't say like, I'm so happy that he's dead, now I'm not going to be abused. She really tells us that it wasn't a marriage of abuse. They got along, and there were some good times and some bad times, and that's every marriage. I mean, yeah, and there's no, I don't think there's any marriage where it's always going to be, rainbows and sunshine. There's always going to be some fights and some conflicts because at the end of the day, a marriage is between two people, and as human beings, we have our own ideas of what we want to do, and in marriage there's always going to have to be sacrifice. But when you're single, there is no sacrifice. You just do whatever you want. But when you're in a marriage, especially for women at that time, you have to ask for permission to do certain things. Louise Mallard here, she's just excited because now she doesn't have to ask anyone or be tied to anyone, and she can develop and create an identity for herself and be her own woman. And this joy is just unexpected, but it's flourishing within her, and it's like she's just drinking this new drink of, like she's drinking life in for the first time. This ability to be free, this ability to be your own person. This is so new to her and so wonderful to her, and she's just looking ahead, looking at what life is going to be for her. And she's happy. She's happy. She's in the things like she's fighting between emotions because she is mourning Brittany Mallard's death, her husband's death, because he wasn't a bad person. He wasn't, he didn't deserve to die in a horrible train crash. She is mourning that, but at the same time, she's rejoicing because now she has the joy of being free, of being independent. And then, like, Josephine goes upstairs to get her, and they come down the stairs, she unlocks the door, and of course, the door was closed, the door was locked, and all of that jazz, and she unlocks the door. She comes down the stairs with her sister, with Josephine, and it's kind of like she's coming down the stairs. Yes, she's sad that her husband died. Yes, she's sad that Brittany's dead, but at the same time, she's coming down the stairs victorious because now she's free. She's finally independent, and pretty much her husband just walks in, comes home. Hey, honey, I'm home. And she drops dead, right? Louise Mallard drops dead. When your husband comes home after being pronounced dead and he looks normal and not dead, and you were thinking about freedom and of independence, you were thinking about freedom and independence, and that it throws you off, it shocks you, and then she drops dead because she already had a bad heart. And really, she dies and she drops dead because that joy that she just experienced, the joy of being independent and free, the second that the husband walked through that threshold, the second that he walks in the door and into the house, the second he walks through the door and into the house, is the same second she sees him and she loses her freedom that she thought she gained. And the doctor, they actually get a doctor to come in to kind of try to take care of her, and he says that she died of the joy that kills. And Bradley, the husband, the sister, and Richards, you would think that they thought that it's the joy that she's so happy to see her husband that the shock of joy kills her. But no, it's not joy being given to her or her receiving joy by, or her being happy that her husband comes home. She's killed by joy being subtracted from her, right? She's killed because the joy that she thought she was going to have was ripped away from her by her husband coming home. Now, there's this is a very important point here, because the people watching her, they would think that she would be happy because her husband's not dead. And she would be. She should be happy, and I would think she would be. But the thing is, she can't accept that happiness because she had already obtained a greater happiness, the happiness of being your own individual. And it's kind of like one possible happiness killing a greater happiness, and pretty much the absence of joy, of great joy, kills her, because that joy of being free and independent was such an amazing thing to her. Having it ripped away from her heart, having it ripped away from her, was too much to bear, and she dies. So the audience, the people, her husband, her sister, Richards, the people who are watching her are like, man, she was too excited. But to us, we're like, no, she wasn't too excited. She was entirely horrified and depressed and shocked because her husband's not dead, what she really wanted has been ripped away from her. And that's how the story ends. Yeah. In terms of analysis, in terms of deeper meaning here, again, this says a lot about the 19th century and the women that existed there. Writers like Kate Chopin, there were a lot of female writers in the 19th century. Their writings helped spark a revolution within the 20th century because, that's the women's suffrage movement took place within the 20th century. When we're thinking about prohibition, that all comes from women and women starting to wake up in America and starting to fight for what's theirs. And the thing that really, really establishes women as equals to men in America and in other countries around, yeah, because a lot of countries follow America around the world. You know, during the world wars, a lot of women entered the workforce. And so when women start to, earn money for themselves and have the power of the purse and be their own individuals and not have to marry for finances or to have a life, they gained independence and freedom and the power of choice. But within the 19th century, within the earliest 20th century, women couldn't decide they couldn't decide anything for themselves. They would have to rely on their husbands. Now, Kate Chopin completely destroys the idea, well, what if your husband was nice? Well, yeah, the husband, Brindley, was a nice husband, a loving husband, the short story tells us, but that ideal still doesn't beat freedom. That ideal still doesn't beat the actuality of having your own identity that is not tied to your husband. Now, one thing I would like to add, in the 20th century, we still have marriages. Now, the marriages in the 20th century are not like the marriages in the 19th century, but at the same time, whenever you get married, you do not have the same level of freedom that you had when you were single, because when you are married and just when you're in a relationship, when you make decisions, you can't just make them for yourself. You have to make them for you and your spouse. What I mean by that is, if you're married, you can't just decide on impulse to just move to another country. You have to pretty much talk to your spouse and convince that, your significant other to move with you, because you're not just making decisions for yourself. You're making decisions for the both of you, because you're a unit now. So as a unit, sometimes sacrifices are going to have to be made, and what somebody wants might not be what the other party wants or what the other person wants, and there's going to be conflict at times. And sometimes, sometimes the husband's going to have to give up something, or sometimes the wife is going to have to give up something. So marriage takes a piece of both the husband and the wife's freedom away and adds it to the unit, because the unit has to work together for it to exist and for it to last. So yeah, when you get married, you do give a piece of your freedom away, and some would say for a greater purpose, because then, if it wasn't for a greater purpose, then why are you doing it? So the story of an hour is very significant. Now, I do have some personal questions about this. First and foremost, I don't get Richard's part in this short story, because I know he works at the newspaper's office, but I want to know who made this death list, right? Because if a train crash happens, I would think it would take several hours for people, especially within the 19th century or the early of 20th century, when science wasn't, science wasn't up to where it is now. I mean, that death list got made fast. And how did it determine? Because, I mean, in the 19th century, you're not going to have fingerprints. You're not going to have, the technology that we have today. How would they have made a list of dead people who were supposedly on the train that fast? So that makes no sense to me. And some people say, when you research this title, some people say that all of this happened within an hour. I mean, that's quite fast, right? For a train wreck to happen and for the newspaper to... So, in an hour, a train crashes, people are dead, the authorities figure out everyone who's on that train. They have a list. They've already sent that list to the newspaper, and the newspaper already knows everyone who died on the train. That is no, all of that can't happen within an hour. So that doesn't make any sense to me. If the idea that all of this happens within an hour, then I think the authorities weren't involved in this train crash. I don't think anybody did any investigation, because I would imagine in a train crash that kills a bunch of people, there would be fire and mangled, metal and bodies everywhere. To kind of like organize all of that, figure out who these people are, and put names on a list and get it to the local newspaper, it would take several hours. I mean, I feel like for all of that to happen within an hour, for names to be put on a list within 1 hour, I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know how that fits. I feel like the list was, if this story does take place within an hour, I feel like it's too fast, because I don't know how you get all of that together. Train crashes, authorities come in, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I guess Chopin wasn't thinking about, investigations and getting the right names onto lists. So yeah, maybe that's not really the focus of the story, and it is not. That's just me and my personal ideas coming forward. But I still feel like it's too quick for a train to crash, for a newspaper to get a list of dead people that fast, and for Richards to just literally walk quickly to this household and tell this woman that her husband is dead. Because Richards, honestly, I blame Richards for Louise Mallard's death. I mean, I guess he brings her some sort of he's the spark that allows her to think of a different world for herself, and maybe for a freedom that a lot of women would obtain, and a lot of and a freedom that a lot of women want. But at the same time, his revelation is the thing that causes Louise to die. So that part of the story, if it happens within an hour, it doesn't make sense to me. So that's my perspective. And again, that has nothing to do with the overall meaning of the story, and what role it plays within, I guess, even feminism, and women rights, and women obtaining freedom and independence for themselves. When you're looking at this short story, you're looking at what role it can play within women gaining rights, women getting the right to vote, and the temperance movement, and other movements that involve women within the 20th century. You can see that it aligns with women being independent, women obtaining their freedoms in America, and perhaps in other countries as well. So it's a very significant story. You can see, my favorite part is just like how Louise Mallard is just trying to cope with all these emotions that are playing within her, because at one point she is crying and mourning her husband's death, because again, he wasn't a bad person, so she is sad of that, and they lived together, they were married, he was a loving person, so she is truly mourning that, but at the same time she's happy. It's two massive emotions that played within her, and she was willing to accept mourning her husband and putting him to rest. It was sad for her, but it was something that she could overcome, because she knew after that entire ordeal she would have been free and become an independent individual. So it's two emotions that she was, that were fighting against within her. But when the joy of being independent was just ripped away from her, she just ends up dying. So, yeah. Well, that's all I had to say on this short story. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.